they can handle the first presentation, I think, and then we'll go from there. Is that too high up? Are we okay? That's okay? Okay. All right. Just to let you know, I'm Wayne Carlson. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Public Agency Insurance Pool and Public Agency Compensation Trust. We commonly call them together Pool Pact. And Boulder City's been a member since, I believe it was 1988 in our program. And so this program was created through the Interlocal Cooperation Act. And I guess it depends on where I stand, whether it gets an echo. But so local governments that form the pool, which are cities and counties and school districts, special districts, towns, all over Nevada, did it under the Interlocal Cooperation Act, which means the governments own the program. So this is not a private sector insurance program. This is a government self-insured group program. We have about 129 members now throughout the state, in rural and smaller communities. We have a few of the smaller agencies within the urban centers, but we focus on the smaller communities. And our goal is to manage the risk so we pay out less in claims in the long run, and we make for better governance. So I started teaching the three programs that I'm going to do today. Positive governance, which talks about the board's role and responsibilities to each other and to the community. The open meeting law, and the experts on that are the Attorney General's office. So I will not get into all the nuances and interpretations that they might make, but they have the legal authority to do that. And then the third one is the ethics law, which is the same thing. There's an ethics commission. It's their job to administer the law. So I'm going to give you some grounding in the open meeting law to start with, because the legislature always has a lot of fun taking on issues and trying to resolve them in 120 days where there's a lot of horse trading. And the open meeting law had substantial changes this session. The ethics law had substantial proposed changes that did not pass. They got lost in the shuffle at the end, and so they didn't actually go through. So for the attorneys that represent our members are invited to a workshop that we're doing on July 19th up in Carson City, where we're going to have a representative from the AG's office and a representative from the Ethics Commission talk about the laws that passed and the law that was proposed but did not pass. So we're going to go through all of those and try to give you grounding. And I think it's important that if you have a question, that we make this an interactive discussion so we can cover the fundamentals but also answer the burning questions that you might have. Because I recognize that newly elected officials are going to learn very quickly what they don't know about government. We all think we know what cities are all how they're managed and governed and that sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is that we as a public don't get enough knowledge till we sit in that role or we perform those services for the public as staff. So it's important to understand that there's substantial constraints on public officials that those of us in the private sector don't have. And that's because governments have police powers. So particularly the city council, they're the ultimate responsible party for all the actions of the officials within the city. And so that constrains a number of things. And it starts constraining in the way they conduct business and under the open meeting law. It also constrains how you conduct business in the public. And we'll talk about those constraints a little bit further. But recognize that because you have police powers, you are responsible for enforcing the laws. The Constitution of the United States, the state of Nevada, the laws of both the U.S. and the state, and your local city charter and ordinances. All of those are within your responsibility. Because one of the things in the oath of office is you promise to uphold what? The Constitution of the United States, and so on and so forth. So all of this is your responsibility. So the first rule is follow the law. And for those of us in the public who don't like the law, it's going to have to be changed because the city council has to follow the law, and so do the city employees. So until the law changes, those are the rules of governance. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the open meeting law. And you've got handouts. If you didn't get them, there's some out there. And the other logistics I'll point out is for those that are needing continuing ed credits, we have certificates for you that you can complete at the end. And if you're not familiar with the Certified Public Officials program run by the University of Nevada, Reno, they have a statewide program where you can take classes through them, but also get credits for attending trainings that we do, trainings that others may do that are authorized through that system to get the Certified Public Officials designation. That does not mean you're certifiable, that just means you're certified as having completed some programs and do have some knowledge about local government, everything from finance to governance and open meeting law and ethics and that sort of thing. So with that, let's talk about the open meeting law, which is NRS Chapter 241. And this should work. It says it's going to work.
Yes, it's just changed.
There we go. All right. The first quote there sets the tone that applies to Nevada law, and this is from James Madison, our first president, fourth president, rather. Note that it's a very strong statement of popular information. If you can't, it's a farce or a tragedy to say you're governing with transparency. So that's one of the things that there's another law called the Public Records Law that says just every record a government creates, with a few exceptions, is a public record, and you can get access to it. And there's those few exceptions get litigated frequently or get challenged in the legislature. But the open meeting law derives from this kind of statement of transparency. The people must know what the government's doing in order to assess whether the government is serving them. Legislative intent. It says all but public interest to aid in the conduct of the people's business. So the reason the city functions is to help the people do their business, which is running their communities in a safe and healthy environmental way. In other words, we don't want our communities run haphazardly. We don't want the money that we give as taxpayers to be misspent unwisely. And so we talk about those issues in public and try to come to a consensus. So your deliberation, there's only one exception to this we'll get to later. All deliberations must be in the open. That means you discuss it in the open. And all actions must be taken in the open, and there are no exceptions to those actions. And there's a lot of meaning behind deliberation and a lot of meaning behind action. And then if you're going to take certain actions, you have to notify the person subject to that action that they're going to be discussed. And that gets to personnel issues. It may get to the business license kind of thing, where you might revoke a license or grant one or modify or put conditions on it. You got to notify them that you're going to do that. So they have that public discussion. So first, we have the law defines what is a public body. So we know that the city council, the city is a public body by definition. So are most governmental agencies as we know them. And the question came up before this is, what about homeowners associations and things like that? Well, they're not in this definition of public body because they're not created by charter, ordinance, or statute, and that sort of thing. But it does include committees and subcommittees. And we'll go through how that applies to them. So an administrative, executive, advisory, or legislative body of a local government. So those are the kinds of things that could become committees subject to the open meeting law. And I'm reminded of a small county I was doing the training in, and a couple of people came up to me and said, well, we're a committee of two, and we meet maybe once or twice a year on beautification. And we've never filed an agenda, posted an agenda under the open meeting law. Are we subject? And the answer was yes. You've always been subject. And they go, wow, never knew. So we know that happens. But it's important that we have a common understanding of, if they're going to advise or have control over any public money, they're likely going to be subject to the open meeting law. Obviously, you have to perform a government function. So a government function, city council is responsible overall, and they can delegate certain powers. And then they delegate powers to these advisory committees to give them feedback, to give them recommendations. Then you're an extension, you're an arm of the government. And so therefore, you're subject to the open meeting law. Now in your case, the city was formed as a council-manager form of government. So the council is the policymaker, the manager is the one who implements those policy decisions. So the kind of thinking that a policymaker does is different from the kind of thinking that a management operations level does. Not to say they can't engage in a conversation on a policy, but the role and functions are different. So the council is oversight, management is the doer side. And so they have to follow your policies or advise you when the policy isn't working, what things you might want to consider to change in that policy. And that's a source of some potential, stresses. But if you adopt a policy that says, do this, and the manager does that, who's responsible for that policy? It comes back to the council because it's your policy. Now, if the manager didn't execute the policy in accordance with the directive, then it's a management issue. And who's the one employee that the council has? The city manager. Where are the other employees? Who do they work for? There's some sitting here. Who do you work for? Who gives you direction? The manager. So for those that are brand new city council people, that's one of the first governmental constraints you have, is to recognize that your job is policy, and your job is not to go out and tell city employees, do this, do that. I've had it happen around this state over the years Had a county commissioner tried to fire an employee because he didn't like the work he was doing on the site. And another county commissioner kick an employee off fixing a well pump because the county commissioner said, I can do this better than you. You know what you're doing. Not their job. What is your job as a council? Your job is to let the manager know through your regular communications if there's issues, and the manager's job is to deal with those issues. And the other job of the council is to ask a question of yourself. Is this a policy problem or an operations problem? Because if it's an operations problem, it belongs to the manager. If it's a policy problem, it belongs to the council. So here we are, performing a government function, and the manager wants to hold a meeting with his staff. Is that subject to the open meeting law? Not necessarily. It could be, though, if management said, oh, in that staff meeting. As soon as that becomes part of that staff meeting, they're subject to the open meeting law. So the goal of the staff meetings is to have a discussion and dialogue, but the job of the manager is to wrestle with that and decide for himself what to do with that information and that input, to give the directives. It's not his job to have staff vote a recommendation unless he does it in the form of a public meeting with a proper agenda, public comment, all the appropriate tools. All right. Well, looks like we put something else on the screen. There it is. All right. Let's see if there we go. So a safety committee is an example. If we delegate to the safety committee certain authority to review and make recommendations for action, then that committee is subject to the public meeting law, open meeting law. However, if the manager forms a safety committee, internal safety committee, and they meet and discuss safety issues, they're not subject to the open meeting law. So it depends on how it's formed and what the role is. So a committee formed whose job it is to give recommendations to the council, that's subject. If the job is to discuss and give information and suggestions to the manager, then it's not subject. So here's what happened this last legislative session. Public body was defined as including a working group or committee of 2 persons. So committee of 1 is exempt, right? So it has to be 2. And a majority of the members or staff members of the public body that appointed them. So if it's a mix of staff and members of the public on this committee, then it's going to be considered a public body. And if they're authorized to make recommendations to the public body for action, then that becomes subject. So occasionally, you might have a staff department that's supposed to get public input on whatever project. Let's say it's a parks issue. And they want to engage the public and get some input. And so there's a couple of staff members appointed and a couple of members of the public appointed to this working group. Well, that working group, if their job is to give recommendations, now becomes subject to open meeting law. However, if staff simply was directed by the manager, go out and talk to a number of people in the public, get some opinions, get some ideas, and then bring it back to me. If it's not a formal committee or a working group, then it's not going to be subject. So it depends on how it's structured. So be careful to these definitions, because you can get in violation of the open meeting law. But this is a new change that happened this session. And I've highlighted them in yellow when they were changed from AB 70. So the next is when is a public body actually in meeting? A gathering, as they call it. Well, it's a gathering when you have a quorum present to deliberate toward a decision or to take action. So the deliberation process is part of the public body meeting definition, this gathering definition. So how do you get a quorum? Well, let's say you and I are on the council, and it's a 5-member board. Do I have a quorum? Just the two of us? No, I'm one short. But what if you and I have a discussion, and then I go over here and I talk to you, and we're on the council? Do I have a quorum? I may have a problem. It depends on the discussion, though. Because if I'm simply asking you a question, and I don't say anything to you that I've talked to anybody else, and I just ask you a question to get input, that's input as a fellow member, but we're not deliberating what to do with that information. But we have to be careful, because what if one of you turns to you and says, you know, I was talking to Wayne, or I heard that John was talking to Wayne, and this is what they concluded. What do you think? Now I've created that conversation that's a deliberation outside the quorum. Outside the public view. And remember, the goal of the open meeting law is that the public is entitled to that transparency to know what you're deliberating on and to know what your actions are. So that changes the landscape for you as elected officials who are out there and supposed to engage with the public. It changes the landscape to make you very cautious, because deliberating toward a decision is a violation of the open meeting law, and we'll get to the consequences of those violations. So you have to be very careful, and we'll go through some more details. So, yeah.
Yeah, in the example you gave between each of us, independently, it's not a violation. If you provide the comments back to each one of us the same, does that then become a violation?
It can be, because it's sharing information, and the best thing to do when you have information you think everybody else ought to see on the council, get it to the manager, get it to the clerk, become part of the board packet so the public can see what you're seeing. So you don't have these private conversations. Remember, it's a public fishbowl, and they get to watch you swim around. And hopefully you won't drown in the process, but that's the nature of it. All right. If I'm doing a formal meeting, then I do a quorum count. But when I can get in trouble is with these informal meetings, where I go from person to person by phone, by email, by other means of communications, direct conversations, and I start that deliberative process. That's a walking quorum. So for all practical purposes, can treat it as if it's you. All right. This last one, AB 70, came up because, and it's another one, big government, big size government got into trouble because they had a small meeting room. And this was the school district, Washoe County School District up north. They had a small meeting room, and whenever there was a controversial issue, there wasn't enough room in the actual room for them to let all the public in so they have overflow rooms. So the legislature is making it very clear that you have to make reasonable efforts to ensure that the facility is large enough to accommodate the anticipated attendance by one means or another. They were trying to go a little further and say you have to have a single room, but the legislature didn't go that far. They just said to have reasonable efforts to having a room big enough for what you think is going to come. Because whether you know it or not, during budget hearings, hardly anybody shows up. Is that true here? Pretty much, yeah, and that's kind of consistent, because why? Because people think budgets are boring. But they're not.
As our finance director.
They're not. Budgets are policy documents. Who's got policy responsibility? Yeah, the council does. So it's important stuff, because that sets the direction of what the priorities are, what the direction the city's going to go, what the city thinks is the right thing to spend money on, and what's the thing you're going to spend less money on, because you never have enough money. And that's the responsibility of the taxpayers, is to give you enough and hold you accountable for the policies you use to use that money. And if they don't like it, they'll take you out. They do that from time to time. It's called elections, right? But the goal is that you serve the public with the funds you have available. If you need more, you got to go ask for it. You got to get a vote. All right?
Can I ask one more question before you leave gatherings? You mentioned the term working group. Do working groups fall under the same requirements as the one you just talked about?
Yes, a committee or working group is subject to all the provisions of the open meeting law. So the same with the walking quorum will apply. The same quorum responsibilities apply if it's a committee or working group created by the city. All right, AB 7. Again, this was another change. It's probably more of a clarification, but if we have a meeting that's teleconferenced or video conferenced, then you have to be sure that people on both sides can hear the discussion or see the discussion. So I watched a little bit of your council meeting last night, and there was one council member that was on the phone, and that's fine. That still counts in the quorum, as long as that council member could hear, and the rest of the council could hear, and the public who was here could hear. So as long as that was a fully open discussion under a teleconference, that was fine. You can have an all teleconference meeting if necessary. And with the board of the pool and Pact, because we're spread all over the state, we do teleconference meetings frequently for routine items in between the annual meeting. All right. So it's the job of the chair, or in this case the mayor, to make sure that the facilities are working, that the teleconference system is working. And if it's not, recess the meeting till it gets fixed. Because otherwise you're denying the person who's participating by phone from full access to the conversation. And I'll give you an example. This happened a few years ago. Douglas County had a teleconference, video conference capability from its Valley meeting space to the Tahoe secondary meeting space. And during the course of the meeting, there was a disruption of the feed. So they recessed the meeting to allow that to get fixed. That was the right thing to do. But kind of a side story on it. one of the county commissioners saw that two other commissioners were talking, so less than a quorum, and he walked over and joined them in the conversation. And they were talking about an issue that was on the agenda. And then he realized, whoops, I just created a quorum. And he backed away. And as soon as he had the video feed back up, he then disclosed that he had inadvertently stepped into a quorum discussion, told them the nature of the discussion, and made a record at the moment. It's important because each of you who participates in a violation setting like that is held accountable. Whether you initiated it or just inadvertently walked into it, either way, you're accountable. So it's important for you to do your vigilance about, am I deliberating outside of the public eye? All right. There it is. So what about electronic communications? They're ubiquitous, right? So if you participate in social media, emails, faxes, or call a quorum of the board, is it a violation? My fundamental answer is yes, because you're participating in a deliberation outside the public view without a properly noticed meeting. And you can see all of those symbols are different kinds of social media that are out there. So again, this is another constraint on the government, because your participation when you have police powers must be, according to the open meeting law, properly noticed, agendized, and the protocols followed under the open meeting law to have that kind of deliberation toward a decision. So that's the danger. So the email example would be if as you mentioned before, you got some good information you thought everybody else should see. So I create my email with that attachment. And I say, this is important information, and you start to open a deliberation, potentially, right? And I email blast all the fellow council members. What have I done? I started to deliberate toward a decision, potentially. Now, if a second council member who got that email, and maybe you only emailed one council member, and they forward it to a third council member with their comments, now you got a walking quorum. So my suggestion is, if you have something that everybody else in the council ought to see, get it to staff and get staff to put it into a board packet of material. So the wrong number.
Might be a council member call.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello? How much of this I can handle, maybe slipping out of it sometime before it's over.
All right, well, we're happy that you joined us.
Yeah.
All right. We have a telephonic council member joining us, so that's fine.
Council member, could you put your phone on mute? Can you hear me? It's on
Okay, you
mute.
put it on mute now.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Wayne.
The joys of telephone meetings, you know.
Yeah, good now.
And the delay. Had to go to China and back, you know.
Yeah. All right. So that deliberation has to be in the public setting with a properly noticed, and that's 3 days notice meeting. All right. Social gatherings is another opportunity to get in trouble or to have fun. If it's truly a social gathering, like you're going to the Jamboree event, and all the council members are there, that's fine. It's a social gathering. You're not there to deliberate toward a decision or to make a decision. That's not the purpose. But just like any, say you go to the League of Cities conference, and you're all sitting together as council members, or two of you or three of you are sitting together, and you start talking city business. You've created a deliberation toward a decision just by that conversation, and could be challenged under the open meeting law. So what I recommend is when you go to these social gatherings or you go to these conferences, meet new people from other towns. They have experiences that they can share with you, and you can share yours with them, and you can learn from each other about the issues that face these communities. And there's some amazing commonalities and some amazing differences. When you raise taxes $1 in Caliente, it's a heck of a lot less money than Boulder City. And it's important to understand, how do they do it when they need to move something forward? What challenges have they faced? So you want to learn from those others, and that keeps you away from a quorum. Besides, you see these council people all the time. So meet new folks. It's kind of interesting because I watch this at conferences all the time, and I see the same folks sitting together every time from the same community. And it baffles me that you don't want to learn from other communities. You may say, what's the relevance of Elko County to Boulder City? Well, we don't know until we find out through conversation what issues they face. Maybe you've never faced the shovel brigade that they faced, and you have no idea what that is. Well, that was a protest on public land issues that wound up with people literally driving shovels down from Wyoming and all across Nevada to keep a recreational area open because they were in a battle with the BLM. And if you don't know what the BLM is, that's the Bureau of Land Management, the federal agency, and there was a conflict with them and the locals. And so there's issues that they have. Well, could you have those issues here? Do you have public land? Well, all over Nevada, we get 85% public land, right? So we could have those interface issues. We could have all kinds of things come up. You can learn from each other. All right, AB 70 clarified that this kind of workshop, which has always been treated as a social gathering, it's training. You're not here to deliberate toward a decision or make one. So it's not been subject to, but many folks have been nervous about that and have posted it as a regular public meeting in the past. And that was fine, but it was not necessary. And so now the legislature said, if it's for this kind of purpose, it's clearly exempt. You don't have to do a notice public, all the public meeting protocols, as long as you don't deliberate toward a decision or take action during the training. So we can have discussion, but we're not going to have you deliberate on a matter toward a decision. You do that in your council meetings. All right. The one exception, and this one's near and dear to me, because I proposed that we should have closed sessions with our legal counsel because we needed attorney-client privilege discussions. Now, I did this back in '82 for the '83 legislative session. And my own senator was a railroad man, and he railroaded me, put it that way. I came to committee hearing, and his response to me was on this proposal, it's a limited proposal just for discussing litigation. He said, "How dare you suggest we do anything outside the public view?" And I explained all the reasoning that attorneys need to have discussion with their clients about strategies or what development of information in the case and all that sort of thing before they can move forward on the case. And the bill died. Fast forward 20 years, and Senator Terry Kerr, who's not a public attorney, he was a business attorney, but he's not a public attorney, and he discovered that there was no attorney-client privilege. During a legislative session, he put in a bill to authorize attorney-client privilege discussions with the counsel on threatened or pending litigation. Passed unanimously. That's what I've learned over the years. Sometimes they're just not ready. So this is the state of the law, and the reason I emphasize it's on threatened or pending litigation only is because don't try to go into your controversies that might possibly result in somebody being unhappy and therefore litigate. That's not threatened. And if you blow that, the legislature's tendency is to make it more open. So you'll lose this privilege that you've had, but you've only had it. You only had it for 20 years now, a little over 20 years. So this is the one time where you can actually have a discussion with your attorney and you can deliberate. And that means to discuss pros and cons of a decision and to propose things that you might do or you might ultimately put in a settlement or proposal. And you can do all those in that closed session if there's pending or threatened litigation. And there's two ways to have those discussions. One is the city attorney can simply call up the counsel, say, "I need to see you, let's meet wherever this location might be, and we're going to discuss threatened or pending litigation." There's no notice, no requirement for notice, no public discussion. It's a non-meeting. That's one way. The other way is during a council meeting, properly agendized, you would have two agenda items. One is closed session pursuant to this provision to deliberate on the pending litigation or the threatened litigation, XYZ versus city. Then you exclude the public from the meeting, or the council moves to another room and has that discussion. Then they come back. A second agenda item needs to be there, say action item. Actually, the language should be possible action, XYZ versus city. And that's when the action is taken. And the council should preserve the confidentiality of the closed session and not say, "Well, in closed session, we discussed merits of our case and we're screwed and here's how." No, it's confidential and privilege. You don't want that out because the litigation may not get resolved. Unless you got a binding settlement agreement already agreed to, it may not get resolved. So then at that meeting, you just simply say, "Based upon our discussion, I move that we do X, Y, or Z in this case. Settle it, fight it, whatever." That's the separate action item on the agenda. So two components. If you take your decisions too far in your closed session and go to action, that action is void as a matter of law. So don't even try it. It's void. So protect your attorney and protect your attorney-client privilege when you have these closed sessions. It's important to be sure that that's well protected. decisions. Decisions are based upon a motion, a second that authorized that decision to be made, and then a vote on that motion. And if you as a fellow council members don't like the motion, you can have a motion and second and have discussion, and you can propose an amendment to the motion, in which case you have to get the motion maker and the second to agree to the amendment to the motion. In the end, you want to make sure you have a clear motion. And the city clerk will appreciate it if you do not ever use the term "so moved." Why? Why does that matter?
Not a clear motion.
It's not very clear, is it? What it is, and I've had it happen, I had a chairman who was like this. He'd go on these rambling, subpart conversation, and somebody out there would yell, "So moved." Somebody would say, "Second." And I'd say, "Time out." Wait a minute. Clarify the motion. What is the motion on the record? Because that's your legacy. Those are the decisions that are going to be captured in the minutes of the action you took, and it will be subject to scrutiny years down the road when somebody is unhappy with some result of that decision. So you want to make it clear. And if you don't like the motion the way it's made, take the time to recraft it. And the rest of the council members can help you with that by suggesting ways to clarify the motion. Now, as we're discussing motions, let's clarify that when you have a chair of a board or a mayor with a council, the mayor is the orchestra conductor. They're making sure all the council members have an opportunity to participate in the discussion and encourage those conversations. Normally, the mayor should not make the motions, should call for the motions from the council. But the goal is to bring the council members into that conversation and make sure they're making the motions and the seconds. And then you vote. And in most boards I've seen, the chair or the mayor will vote last. Because there's certain power with the leader of a group, and it could have undue influence over the discussion. So that's why you should withhold and do it last. Now, in the city's case, because you have all elected officials, there's certain requirements for the vote. And this came right out of Clark County years ago. Clark County had some big project, and a good chunk of the commission was conflicted out and couldn't vote for various reasons. The ultimate decision was a 2-to-1 vote. All the rest of them were conflicted out and couldn't vote. And they denied this big project, and litigation followed. But the legislature was watching. And they said there's no way that a minority of a board on a split vote should count. So they passed this law that said if you're a board of elected officials, there must be a quorum, number one, and an affirmative vote by a majority of the positions. So if you have a 9-member board, that's 5 positions, which also is the minimum for a quorum, right? If you have a 5-member board, that means 3 votes in the affirmative, as long as a quorum's present. Well, that's also the quorum. So what if you have 2 members absent and can't participate at all? So you have 3 members, and you have a 2-to-1 vote. does not pass. So there must be 3 affirmative votes, 3 affirmative positions voting in favor of the matter. So if you have an issue that you think needs to be fully vetted, and you get a 2-to-1 with only 3 of you present, then you may want to motion to table it until you have a full council. Put it off to another meeting. Because otherwise it's going to die for lack of the quorum, or excuse me, lack of a voting of the minimum number of positions. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, let's say that you have the majority abstain for some reason. So they've got a conflict of interest. So you can't get a quorum of that body to vote. What do you do in a situation like that?
Well, the legislature hasn't really addressed that one. They really haven't addressed it. They have not been clear on that. I don't know unless you have an interpretation. I'm not aware of a formal opinion addressing that very issue. Now, abstentions should be rare, okay? And only in the case of clear conflicts of interest.
I was just thinking a construction issue that would happen.
Yeah, there's a number of issues. But I would, my guess would be that you'd try to get to where you have enough council members present that you can vote even with that one abstention. But it's possible that you will have a situation where too many abstentions occur, which was kind of the Clark County problem. There was absences plus abstentions for legitimate conflicts where they could not vote because they had a pecuniary interest. That's an ethics law issue. So if they did vote, it'd be a violation of the ethics law. It's a problem they've never fully resolved, at least not clearly in the law. All right, now if it's a mix, and this is where you get it with committees or mixed boards of committees where you have elected and appointed officials, in those instances, a normal majority vote would apply. So if you had a quorum, you could have a 2-to-1 vote. It's only on the all elected official boards. You had a question?
That was it.
Okay. That's an argument for having a mixed board, yes.
You talked about abstention and being rare. When should you abstain, when should you not?
Really should only be when you have an absolutely clear conflict of interest. So in other words, if you're analyzing it through an ethics lens, if you have pecuniary interest, you're going to benefit from it financially, then that would clearly be a conflict of interest and voting in the affirmative. And there's exceptions, and that would be if your conflict is the same as everyone else and was dealing with that issue. But if it's unique to you and the relationship, then in that case you would have to abstain. It's not appropriate to do, as one county commissioner had a habit of doing. He abstained on anything controversial because he didn't want to be accounted for. The only worse than that is not showing up to the meeting because the issue is controversial, not wanting to participate in the controversy. You were elected by the people to represent them and do your job. In the case that the council person did not show up, it was because she had to clean house. But the real reason was it was a controversial issue and she didn't want to participate. What happened was that city wound up not having a quorum. Because one of them was ill, one was out of town and unavailable. So it was critical that she be there, but she decided that cleaning house was the excuse she was going to use for not showing up. It's not her job. Her job is the city's business on the city's meetings and to vote even on controversies. if you didn't expect that, you shouldn't have put your name in the, up there for election. There's going to be times when it's going to be decisions. That's the nature of the beast. But you chose to be in the public fishbowl because you put your hand up. There's a lot of ways to get elected. Sometimes they push you into it, right? All right. Delegation. This is a new provision. And it says a public body may delegate authority to the chair or executive director or equivalent to make any decision regarding litigation concerning any action or proceeding in which public body or member of the public body is a party in an official capacity and participates or intervenes in an official capacity. And what was this all about? Well, the Ethics Commission had some litigation over one of its decisions. And in between commission meetings, there was an urgent deadline to file a responsive pleading to this litigation. And there was not sufficient time for the Ethics Commission to formally get the commission together to make a formal decision. So the director filed an appeal on that action in the court. That was challenged, and the Supreme Court, Nevada Supreme Court decision, I was astounded that they reached this conclusion, said that only the board can make such decisions. Well, you can just imagine the implications to every local government, where if every time you have a litigation discussion, the attorney has to come and get the council together, get a formal agenda item, get an action. Sometimes the courts are not flexible. And you would wind up with an inability to properly pursue defense of a case. And since our board is, distributed throughout the state, trying to get them together on a short notice is even more logistically challenging. And then to have to make those decisions, which we do regularly on claims, makes it almost impossible to run your entity when you're like us, your claim-paying entity. But it also affects every local government. So this was the legislature's fix. And if you want to read that decision, look at the dissenting opinion, because the dissenting opinion is more right than the actual opinion issued by the court. This was passed in response to that, saying you can delegate authority to appeal a case or some other legal process to the executive director or the equivalent, so the manager, the city attorney, or the mayor. Those could be delegated specifically so you can conduct business in the course of litigation. So sometimes the legislature does react and listen to things that go on. This question came up: can you have an alternate on the council or on these committees? Well, we have alternates on the pool Pact board because our organizing documents allow us to have alternate voting reps, because you guys on the councils get assigned to how many committees do you get assigned to? I know you did assignments last night. How many, or you were talking about it? 4? So 4 committees is not uncommon. It could be more. Some of them may be a lot less in terms of intensity of effort. Others might be very extensive. So you can imagine conflicts will come up from time to time. So you have to orchestrate those. So if your charter said you could have an alternate city council, then you could, but it doesn't. And I don't know of any cities or counties that have alternate people authorized to vote. And it probably would not be a good idea. But on some of the committees, you may want to structure them that way so the alternate can vote when the other can't attend. But it has to be in the organizing documents. What you can't do, unless your authorizing documents say so, what you can't do is say, would you like to be my alternate voting rep tonight for Joe? He's not here. Can you be the alternate voting rep? You would be wise. Can't do that because it has to be in your governing documents. All right. So agendas. These are the council's business that the public needs to know you're going to do. Those are requirements that you communicate to the public what it is you're going to talk about and take action on. And it's important to make sure that you're clear about what it is. So when you look at the draft agenda before it gets to the council, take a look, is the language clear and unambiguous so that we know what action we can take? So if I had on agenda, closure of city street, how many of you are going to show up? What street? Is it Bryce's street? We don't know. Maybe Bryce would show up if we're going to close his street. Well, we don't know. So it's not clear. So to be clear, we would say name of the street and for how long or for what purpose. At least give some information so as a member of the public, I saw that agenda item and I was interested in street closures, I would be able to say, I better show up. Now, same thing is true for reports. Even if there's no action, it's better to be more fully clear than less clear. So if we just say a number, an item that says board reports, what does that mean? Who in the public would want to come if it just says board reports? It's questionable, right? So you're not clear enough. Now there's no mandate in the statute about how much detail you have to give on things like that. But if you know ahead of time that you're going to report on the progress of a program, then put it in as a report on the progress of this particular program. That's clear. So the goal is clarity and transparency about what's going to be part of the discussion. Okay? But on the ones you're going to take action on, that has to be clear. For possible action on closure of B Street is more clear. If I said closure of B Street for 7 days for construction, that's even more clear. So there's some discretion there, but clarity is the goal. Unambiguous statement, so people know that you're actually going to do this particular thing. Okay? Your agenda has to have some statements about how you organize the meeting. And some boards will read these into the record, others will just put them on the agenda and let that suffice. But it has to be on the agenda at least, that the chair of the meeting can move things around on the agenda for efficiencies and economies. If you have an out of area visitor who has a plane to catch, you might move their item earlier, potentially. That can be done. So you can move things around. You can combine items for discussion because they're related or interrelated. And you think, okay, we're going to discuss items 2 and 6 together when item 2 comes up, because they're interrelated. And so you have those discussions, and then you take separate actions on item 2 and 6. Or you can remove an item from the agenda. Now, one thing we learned from an open meeting law case came out of Incline Village about 3 years ago, I'm going to say, where the board called the meeting to order, verified the quorum, did the pledge, and then approved the agenda, and then did public comment. Is there any problem there? This challenge came from a frequent complainer about open meeting law, and he won. He said public comment must occur before any action item. So this district had to change the order of its agenda, so they don't even call the meeting to order. They do the pledge, and then they call for public comment, then they do roll, and then they do approve the agenda. That's caused a lot of consternation out there, but a lot of people had to adjust their agenda formatting. So under the public comment side, there must be 2 public comment periods, general comment, one at the beginning of the meeting before any action, and one at the end of the meeting. And you can't take any action on a public comment made. You can put it on a future agenda, but you cannot take any action on that. Now, it differs in jurisdiction. Generally speaking, if a member of the public asks a question of a council, which will happen, some councils are advised just sit there and listen and thank them for their input. Other councils are allowed to give information if it's a question that just calls for information. They cannot enter into a discussion because that's a deliberation that must be agendized. There's a fine line, okay? So if I say, as a member of the public, if I say, well, how come we haven't done anything on ABC? And you know that you have done something. You're not deliberating, you're just reporting. So in that sense, you could have a comment saying, actually, we have done something on ABC, see our public works director, and he can fill you in. That's not a deliberation, that's just information. But if you're uncomfortable with that, or you, as a council, you have problems with getting into off-agenda deliberation, then it's better to say, thank you for your comments. Always be respectful of the commenter. In fact, it's kind of a joke, but don't question the credibility of a public commenter, no matter how incredible some of them are. Because they might run against you. Or they might get railroaded into being on the council down the road, as happened to a city councilwoman out in West Wendover, who I met when she told me she was a frequent public commenter, and everybody kept telling her that she ought to run. So she finally did, and she said, man, it's different on this side of the desk. All of a sudden, that public commenting was brought home. She now had to make the decision with all the information and on all the competing interests and all the competing discussions. So it was a real challenge for her to shift her thinking. She said, I knew a lot when I was public commenter. I knew nothing when I was council member, because now I had all these other things I had to learn. All right. When we get to restrictions on commenter can say you can constrain the time, and some common number is 3 minutes per person. We ran into this problem with a town where there was a group of constituents that got organized, and there are 8 of them. And the first one would introduce himself and say, "My name is Malcontent." Guess where that's going, right? So Malcontent would take full 3 minutes to make his comments, and he honored the buzzer, because the buzzer came down, he stopped. Then the next person got up and introduced themselves, "My name is Malcontent," and then they did exactly the same thing. So 8 people, 3 minutes each, 24 minutes of public comment. And this was a board that allowed public comment on every action item. So their meetings suddenly went from a couple hours to well past midnight. And so the question became, can we constrain them in any way? So the chair tried to say, look, if you agree with the previous speaker and don't have anything additional to add, just say, I agree with him. My name is on the record, I agree with previous speaker. So other people can comment besides this group of 8. They refused. They were just trying to be disruptive. So I asked the Attorney General's office, who are the experts in this subject, I said, can we constrain the total time for public comment like that? To say not more than, say, 45 minutes. And because you're only constraining the time, not the content, you can. So if it became a real serious problem, they have a solution. And the solution is simply try to compress the time. Now, another city council decided they would do public comment at the beginning and at the end of any agenda item. And the history had been they'd always had comments on the agenda item. And because they operated with public access TV, there were people that complained that the council mumbled, so they couldn't tell what they were talking about. And nobody could make any comment on the agenda item, so they had public comment at the beginning and at the end, and people were very unhappy. But I found that most of the communities do allow it beginning and end and on each agenda item without those kind of issues most of the time. But the key is the comments are First Amendment protected. So telling them they can't say certain things runs the risk of violating their constitutional rights to free speech. Now we'll say on the discussion allowed on an action item, you can have the public discussion, but you ask that no public discussion occurs until after there's a motion and a second on the record. Then you can have public discussion of that item. And after you get the public comments on that item, on that motion, then the mayor would bring it back to the board, the council, and have the council do any further discussion before a decision. And once that discussion with the council is finished, then any council member could call for the vote, but normally the mayor would call for the vote if there's no further discussion. And you could say it, is there any further discussion or amendments to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. And then you take the vote. So just recognize it takes a little more time to do public comment on each agenda item than if you just did it beginning and end. But again, it's how you want to conduct business, because the council is responsible for conducting the city business. And so you want to make sure the public is fully aware of the business you're doing and engaging them in that, because they may have some ideas that the council didn't think of on that motion. But recognize you have time management issue too. You have to get your business done. Okay. The notice provisions we'll get to, not in great detail, because I think your clerk knows how to get the notice out to the public and that sort of thing, but I'll just make you aware there is notice requirements. The agenda has to have clarity as to what's going to take action or have action, and it must say, because the legislature did this a few years ago, for possible action. So you have your description, and it should say for possible action, and then the description of what it is. Or it can be a description of what it is for possible action at the end. I've seen it both ways. Both ways it just says next to. Be acceptable. Okay? For discussion only items, you can label them however you want. The clarity is usually so that just gives the public clarity on what you're going to actually take action. Okay. Unlike other boards in the private sector or nonprofit sector, who commonly say other business or new business, that's not something you have on a city council agenda. Because it's not clear. It's going to come up, so the public needs to know what's clear, or what they're going to discuss, to the extent you can be more clear. All right. So the clear and complete statement for the agenda item, and this is a responsibility of the council members and the council staff to address, is that an item notice in fact to the public of what's the topic, especially on the action items. Using reasonableness, be as specific as you can, non-generic, and if you have a board retreat, the same thing still applies for any action items, okay? So you just look at it and say, is this a clear what we're taking or having discussion and action on? So your meetings have to be open and public. If you're going to video conference or telephonically conference, both parties have to be able to be heard. And the notice has to include 3 locations in addition to the location of the meeting. And then 2014 requires notice at notice.gov. And then there was another requirement that was put in there that the clerk and whoever posts the notice has to document that. They have to sign, date, time, when they posted that item. And that has to be maintained as part of your record. So notice.gov, if you want to see council meetings or county commissions anywhere in the state, you can go to notice.gov. And at that website, you click on the type of entity, and then there's a list of entities, and on that particular entity, you should be able to do one of 2 things. Click to their website, where the agenda is posted, or to an email address where they can send you the agenda. You can request the agenda. So if you want to know what's going on anywhere in the state, I can pull that up. And occasionally I might have to do that because I might have to go to one of those meetings. I want to make sure it's properly posted, properly noticed, especially if I'm doing open meeting law training. Tell them, oops, or great job, whichever. But if you want to spy on your fellow cities, see what they're up to, it's all there. All right, violations. If the Attorney General finds that you violated it, then you have to include an item on your next agenda that says, for possible corrective action. It's the only exception to for possible action. It has to say for possible corrective action. to notify the public that you made a violation. Now, if a violation occurs during a meeting, as the example I gave you with Douglas County, you can correct it on the fly and there's no penalty, as long as you correct it immediately. So as soon as you notice it, make the announcement, oops, we're in a violation situation here. We're correcting that. If an action was taken, a vote was taken, then you want to redo the vote properly if you can. One thing to remember, if you adjourn a meeting, you got to post an entirely new agenda with all the proper notice requirements. However, you can recess a meeting, and that's, again, for the mayor. You can recess a meeting and then reconvene. So if you want to take a break, you can recess and reconvene, then that meeting is still good to continue. But if you actually adjourn the meeting, then it's over and you got to start all over again. What about emergency meetings? Well, if it's going to affect the public health, safety, or well-being, that's a true emergency. There's no notice requirements. It's kind of having a discussion with the attorney. You can just have the meeting. But it has to be only on the emergency. You can't throw in other things. Only on the emergency. So like, for example, the recent earthquakes in California. We had a similar situation in 2008 out in Wells. They held emergency meetings multiple times a day in the first 2 weeks after that, because the aftershocks were similar to what's happening in California. We had a 6.0 main shock and shocks in the 4.5 to 5.5 level for the next 2 weeks. And it was constantly trying to address issues related to that emergency. So they still had to keep a record of it. They had to keep minutes. You had to clearly state on the record what the purpose was. But they couldn't address passing, approval of invoices for routine city business. It was only related to emergency. So like you have a swimming pool, if you were to have an emergency dispersal of some chemical, for example, and public health and safety was at risk, then you might have an emergency meeting if you don't already have authority delegated through management to manage those kinds of things, which is why when you do an emergency ops plan, you want to address what authority the manager would have to spend funds to respond to an emergency. So you don't have to go call the whole council together for everything a normal emergency situation would need an instant response to. But that's a good discussion item as to how much authority you would want to delegate in an emergency. So less than 3-day notice, so you don't have to give the full notice, and you just proceed with that emergency response. And then as soon as you can, you get back to normal business. 3-day notice, proper agenda, and all that sort of thing. All right, the agenda and supporting materials. You can see the legislature was busy here at 2. So you have to have a hard copy of the agenda available at the meeting. So just the electronic website version or emailed version is not enough. You have to have any ordinance or regulation that's going to be discussed. You have to have a hard copy available for public viewing. You only have to have one. You don't have to have one for everybody. And then other supporting agenda material that's provided to the public body or staff to reasonably rely on to deliberate or take action. That includes written records, audio records, video recordings, photographs, and digital data. That's new. So they're defining the data and the materials that go to support an action item. So if staff is referring to an outside expert's report, then that becomes part of the agenda materials. Okay? So obviously there are exceptions like proprietary documents, closed session materials like your litigation or personnel session, or anything declared confidential by law, which is not very much. But it has to be, if it's a statutory confidential, in other words, somebody's social security number, private identifying information, that would be not subject to public disclosure. And if the city or county with a population over 45,000, then when that supporting material goes out to the board, it also has to go out to anyone in the public that wants it. So you guys are less than that for now. Someday you may get there, but right now you're less than that threshold. But I think at your 3% growth ordinance, you're probably not going to get there for a long time. And by then they may move this threshold. Who knows?
I got a question.
Yeah.
Is that saying that our agenda packet has to be hard copy?
Yes.
Just available?
Yeah. It has to be made available on your website at the same time as if it's going to go to the council for the larger communities. So you'll see in the larger communities, they'll put it on the website and there's a button to click for the supporting materials for each agenda item. That's what they'll do. You don't have to do that. But
Some of our packets are 1,000 pages.
I know. Yeah, I watched the new flood control authority that was created up in Reno, and their first meeting was 450 pages. Their second meeting was equal size, and a lot of that's drawings and, technical reports, but all of that was on their website. So. All right, closed personnel sessions. This should be an area that council stays out of, by and large. And the reason for that is the council has one employee. That's the city manager. And his evaluation has to be done publicly. So it's not a closed personnel session. But there may be circumstances within your collective bargaining rights or your personnel documents that allow for appeal to a city council. If that's the case, then these closed sessions are confidential, similar to attorney-client privilege sessions. And the only person that can release any information about what's happened in the closed session, which is an information gathering session where you cannot deliberate and you cannot take action. You're there to receive information. That's all confidential. The only person who can release any of that information is the person subject to the closed session, the employee. It's their choice. Now what's interesting is we had a school district, this fortunately happened a fair amount of time ago. For 13 years in a row, we discovered after the fact, of course, they would just put on their agenda closed personnel session. Didn't say on whom. Then the school board would say, does anybody need a closed session? And in this particular instance, it brought all this to a head. The teacher said, I do. So the council board kicked everybody out, and they had their closed session. And she complained about her principal, fellow teachers, the administration, and she had one of those loud voices that carries outside the room. Guess who was standing in the hallway, just like standing out here, and hearing their names mentioned? Because they weren't noticed, they filed a complaint. And that's when General's investigation and so forth, we wound up having to deal with that issue, and they don't do it that way anymore. So the person has to be on notice and a certain stipulation about how that happens. That's another reason why I say council members stay out of personnel. It's a technical area. We've got a whole HR team that are advisors to your team, and we try to keep these things, under good control so that you don't wind up having to have closed personnel sessions and have those potential violations. But I really encourage council members to stay out of operations in that sense. So your deliberation and your action must be taken in open session if you happen to be subject to a closed personnel session. All right. Your agenda has to state that you'll have the closed session and so forth. But they added under AB 70 this session, notice is not required if to recognize or award positive achievements, tenure, honors, or other commendations. Now notice the language that they use for closed personnel sessions is to consider the character, conduct, and so forth of an employee, and so it could be positive, but it was always perceived as they're in trouble, always perceived as negative. So the legislature says, if you're just going to give them a recognition, then you don't have to go through all these hoops with this closed session notification requirements. You can just put it on the agenda, then you're going to recognize them. All right. You can have closed sessions on labor negotiations, but not on the final approval of the contract. So usually you have a labor negotiator or a negotiating team that goes back and forth. Those are confidential. Any decision taken, as I said before, in a closed session is void as a matter of law, so don't try it. It doesn't count. And I think this was a City of Sparks case where the council had a development proposal, and it was lining up that between the Planning Commission and City Council, they probably were going to deny the developer. The developer felt he was right, and he made a big public outcry that if they deny this, I'm going to sue. So he had threatened litigation. And they went into closed session, and then they deliberated, which they're allowed to do under the closed litigation session. Then they drifted too far and took action. So the developer challenged the open meeting law violation and did sue them. But what the decision on the open meeting law violation was, it was an inadvertent slippage into an actual decision, so it'd have to be a do-over. So they had to put it on the next council agenda and remake the decision. And they upheld the previous decision, and the litigation ensued anyway. But anyway, you cannot hold a closed session to deliberate, appoint, or discuss appointment of a person to a public officer or a member of the public body. So in your discussions about who's going to be on the council, that had to be done in public. You can't have it on the character, alleged misconduct, professional competence, physical, mental health of an elected member of the public body. So that language that was required for closed personnel sessions, you cannot have it closed for city council members. The public is going to evaluate your performance. Every meeting, they're going to evaluate your performance. So you can't go in a closed session to do that. Attorney-client and privilege only applies, again, in threatened or pending litigation. And if you're going to discuss indebtedness, that's also not allowed in a closed session. So what does deliberate mean? And it took the legislature until, I think 2013 it was, to define the term deliberate. It means collectively examine, weigh, and reflect, including with limitation, collective discussion, acquisition, exchange of facts preliminary to the ultimate decision. Nothing in there says take action. But you're discussing alternatives, you're throwing out ideas, you're saying, what if we did this? What are the consequences if we did this or that? Are there alternatives? That's all deliberation. Most of the time, your deliberations are in public, at a publicly noticed meeting. That's where the council has that open public debate, and your, hopefully, collegial debate of trying to find consensus will occur. Then action means the decision is made and there's no secret ballots. Your vote counts. So you can't hide behind abstention. I'm not sure that county commissioner's ever got that, but I don't know if he's still in office. It was out of office, but he might not. Yeah.
I wanted to get some clarity, and perhaps maybe some others might want to jump in. You had talked about earlier that so long as council members who happen to go, say, to a conference or some other gathering for the purpose of not to deliberate, but training, for example, here, that sort of thing, they can be in the same room, they can talk about the weather, they can talk about, as long as they're not talking about any either current or potential, I don't know how you would define potential, items that would come before them as a body to deliberate, discuss, and ultimately come to a decision. What happened, because you talked about examples where a council member might inadvertently come into a discussion, or in some way finds out about what other council members are saying, per se. And in today's environment, you can pick up the paper, all of us can, but we don't necessarily know who's reading the paper and who's not. But we do have other ways of communicating, social media, as you brought up, and I don't even know what half of those symbols are that you put on that slide. But if there is opportunity where you have a collective body, whether it's committee, that are, in some form where, they're all seeing the same information, or potentially one might actually say something and, more than a quorum has the ability, don't know if they've seen it or not, but does have the ability to see it. Does that become an issue in terms of open meeting law violation, whether it's committee members or council that happen to be in the same, group, if you will, that has access to the same information, regardless of whether or not a comment was made in that particular setting?
Yeah, it's dangerous territory because it's outside the public eye. And if you are in a public setting and it can be, you're having lunch together, and if there's a quorum of you having lunch together, then it's very possible that people are going to perceive that you're discussing council business. And that perception alone might get you a complaint or investigation. So that's why it's usually best to not discuss city business outside of a properly noticed meeting when you have more than, or you have a quorum, whether it's a walking quorum or an actual quorum present in the same place. So if you're at a training or a city or league conference, as I mentioned, or if you're doing a social media interaction, that's participating in a deliberation toward a decision. That deliberative process, as that previous slide had the deliberation in there. Where's that definition? I think it's, maybe I went back too far. There it is. All right. where you're looking at, on the reasons for or against the action, right? So if I'm at a League of Cities conference and I'm sitting around with my fellow council members and somebody from somewhere else mentions, here's an issue that we're dealing with. And your group says, yeah, us too. And then you start deliberating about that issue. That's where you start the problem of a discussion outside the public eye for your public. So what you should do is jot a note down and just agree that this is an issue we'll discuss back home in a public meeting. We'll do it properly. And try to gather from the other person what information they have as out of curiosity, but not to discuss amongst yourself what to do on those items. The same thing is true when you start engaging in email exchanges, where you can inadvertently slip into those deliberations. Or even worse is on social media. Because now a whole bunch of people can give input, but it's not a properly noticed meeting. And if a quorum is present, doesn't say they're actually participating, but present, without a proper notice meeting, that's a violation. So present to deliberate, which that definition, or to take action is a violation. So deliberation is again examining, weighing, reflecting upon the reasons for or against the action, including without limitation and collective discussion, acquisition, exchange of facts preliminary to a decision. So exchanging information becomes a problem in the social media world. So your fishbowl changed, didn't it? You got in this fishbowl. Now the public has a right to know what you're talking about, and there is no such thing as privacy that you can assert that you could have asserted before as a private citizen. Now it's the public's business you're deliberating on. And that's why it's a prohibition of the open meeting law. Because that creates that environment outside the public discussions. The public is not aware that you're deliberating toward a decision. Yeah.
So a member of public on social media reaches out and asks a question of a particular council member, and that council member responds to the question. You know, this is on obviously social media, it's public, so people can view it. Now, it's not that I'm there to have this discussion with any other council member, but they could potentially come across it just by seeing it. Is that also could constitute a violation of the open meeting law?
It could if there's a quorum present for that discussion.
And what does present mean on the internet?
You're on the looking, right? Mm-hmm. You're looking. Doesn't mean you did anything. Doesn't mean you said anything. But you're present, and there's a deliberation process. So that's where it becomes a problem.
What if I wanted to say write a letter to the editor of the newspaper? So something once again, would that also be a potential conflict? You
could ask a question by saying, is this something that should go on a public agenda? Is this what you're recommending? That we put it on an agenda for further discussion in the public. That's all. And you don't engage in deliberation on the item, because that's where deliberation should occur, is in the public meeting. So we want to focus it back to the public setting, not to a private discussion. And I know social media isn't really private, but you got to treat it as a private discussion outside a formally noticed meeting.
So, Wayne, I'm not a big social media user, although I have a Facebook page. I don't remember the last time I posted something, but I think if you're using social media like Facebook, Twitter, and all that, I think you can control who has access or visibility of your information. Correct? You could, let people in or let people out. And so if you're part of that group that is let in, and you happen to be, let's say, the Airport Advisory Committee, and the majority, if not all of them, are on this, closed Facebook thing, is that a problem?
I think it is. I think it is because, again, it's a quorum present. And a deliberation is occurring. So by fact that there's a quorum present in deliberation, that's a problem. Yeah.
So my question is, as a communications manager, I have a tendency to post images on social media. Should I avoid tagging all of the members of council in pictures that I post of them?
I don't think that's part of a discussion, though, right?
Well, it could, because people will respond to the pictures, potentially. So would it be best practice for me to just not do it?
I think you're okay with it because it's not the quorum of the council deliberating, and it's or starting a deliberation. It's information, and so that's probably okay. Try and get here, okay.
The question is, if you are going on to a website, a Facebook page of members of the community and aren't participating, you go on and you read and you go off, but don't answer, don't talk, and there aren't other members of council on there talking, is it best just to stay out of that water?
Probably best to stay out, but if you're absolutely sure that there's no other member of the council or the committee or sub-work group that you're involved with, then, you might be able to.
If they're on there observing.
That's participating.
That could be participating.
They're present. That's the key. They're present in a deliberation toward a decision. So that creates the problem.
So
Yeah.
we're dancing around this issue. What we're talking about here is all 5 members of city council are in a closed Facebook group. So.
Yeah, I think it's a problem. Just fundamentally a problem because it's a quorum present in a deliberation.
But that does not prevent public officials from having their own Facebook page that says, here's what I'm doing on behalf of the community.
Right.
Because that is your page in which you're disseminating information, and although other members of the council could actually see your page, how does that differ? I keep going back to my archaic ways of, well, I'm picking up the newspaper today, and, how is that different?
It's different because you don't have a quorum present to deliberate toward a decision. So if it's a group and a quorum is present of the council in that group, that's a problem.
The other thing you're bringing up, though, is that if it's a closed group, it's not a public forum. You have to be invited into the group. So if it's a closed group, it's not able for the public to see, and that's where a problem also would occur.
It occurs just because you're present
In a closed
in a quorum.
Right, in a closed group.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's an open or closed group. If you're participating
But you don't
by
seem
being
to be
present.
active at the same time. That's what we're trying to say. In other words, it's an individual looking in a closed group, but the problem that I'm seeing right now is you have to be invited into the group. So it's not a public group, like Facebook on your page, Al, for example. I've got one too. Anybody can see it, anybody's invited in, anybody can read it. It's not closed, but as soon as it becomes a closed group and you have a quorum, now you got the double whammy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem. I don't know that there's an AG opinion specifically on this kind of a situation, but it may be something to research.
Yeah, in other jurisdictions, it's become become an issue to the point where they have issued opinions. I think we were researching that. It's still kind of on the cutting edge here in Nevada, but it's definitely an issue. So I think we had a question right here too.
Yeah.
I'm twisted a little. So I go to a training session. I read out of the newspaper. I see it on social media, and it's another city in the state, another state in the city issue. Can you not, in an open forum of people, relay that information, but stop short of discussing it?
And again, this is why I suggest that if council members want information to go to other council members, then it should go to all of them, and it should be done via staff. Because here's what can happen. I can say, I want to send you information, and I make a comment on that information. I can't stop you from forwarding that to another council member with your comments, and that starts the deliberative process, right? So it's dangerous for me to not anticipate that by forwarding that email, that communication, that I'm starting a deliberative process. So as a defense, if I'm a separate, a different council member, write your own email, don't forward anything. Write your one-to-one, make sure it's a one-to-one communication, and it's not for forwarding, but you cannot be sure that they won't. And so you can wind up with a deliberation that you didn't intend. And that's the same thing with posting on social media. You can wind up with a deliberation that you didn't intend, but it happens. And now you're both in trouble, or all three of you are in trouble, or the whole council, depending on who's involved. So it's deliberating toward a decision in a quorum, even if it's a walking quorum, a serial quorum. Yes?
So essentially what you're saying is for council not to post on Facebook forums, but you can't be telling them not to read them.
You have to be careful because the issue is present in a quorum, and a walking quorum is present, so that's the first thing. And the second is to deliberate toward a decision. So it's on that edge of getting in trouble.
Well, what's the difference from doing that and all of them happening to read the newspaper at the same time?
That's different because you're not in a quorum when you do that.
Well, how do you know they're not all reading it at the same time?
You don't. It doesn't matter because you're not together in a quorum. You're not present in a quorum. I think it's a problem, and if the AG hasn't addressed it formally, you may want to request a formal opinion on that.
It will be coming. It has to be. It's one of those things that. Yeah. And again, it has in other states. They've weighed in on this very issue, and it's the definition of our law, and so it applies. And so, quite frankly, it is the ability to be present via the internet, right? Mm-hmm. When you're reading a paper, there's no ability, there's no connectivity there, right? And so it is that forum, it is Facebook, that social media that provides that connectivity to where you can be present.
And I think the issue, and thank you for saying let's talk about the group, is that the reality is that social media is so great because it does allow us to get the issue out and to discuss it. But it also is a very strong potential to run afoul of the business of governing and governance, and that you all, as council members, as committee members, are supposed to do that in a public forum where all the public, not just a closed group or not just a special interest group, but everyone has the same ability to access the information. And the dilemma is that if all of you or some of us or all of us are in this group, and we're just, I don't know, I guess the word is trolling, or you know, we're just watching, you know, how, you know, we may be picking up potentially how we feel about a particular situation, and although you may not necessarily voice your opinion there, we all know that, you know, at some point or another, you know, we have, some of you have, and now that becomes a potential issue. And so we want to make sure, I know that I was looking forward to this because, you know, I want to make sure that we, as, you know, the folks that are charged with, you know, governance, that we don't run afoul of the law. And the law is open meeting. And if you are going to discuss any potential issue that you're seeing within a particular closed group that others do not have access to the same information and the same ability to respond, then have we created, as participants of some smaller group, a violation that now the public as a whole did not get the same ability to review and provide input as well.
And even if it's an open group, it doesn't matter. If it is a item of public concern, it has to be properly agendized and placed, you know, in a meeting where it gives notice to the public that that item's going to be discussed. And so that's where the open meeting law applies to those types of deliberations.
And I go back to James Madison and take a look at that again. It's the public's right to know what you're discussing, because it's their business. It's not your business, it's their business. The council is overseeing the city, but it's the public's business they're overseeing. So the public has a right to know. Yes?
So what's the difference of the council getting the information, say from an open Facebook group, or just them getting information from the city manager, because now everybody else doesn't get that information?
Well, the information I'm suggesting you, if you want it out to the council members, it becomes part of your meeting packet when that item is going to be discussed. So it doesn't go out for the purpose of a deliberation outside the meeting. It becomes part of the discussion.
That they send out to the council does end up in a packet. They don't get any other information that is not disseminated.
I think for your purposes, is that the staff's role is to inform the council and the committee members on issues, things that may come up. And so the way we do that is we provide information to the council all the time. When we do that electronically, the way we do that is we blind copy everyone, and we say in the email, all council members have been blind copied, and we do that so that we try to avoid that accidental reply all. When you reply, you hit the wrong button that says reply all, and now you inadvertently have, violated the open meeting law. But there is nothing that says that you can't communicate back to staff and ask additional questions about certain information that maybe we have shared. Oftentimes when staff communicates with committee members and the council, it is to share information so that all council or all committee members receive the same information. And then if you want further information or clarification, then you are free to contact the city manager, or the staff through the city manager to get additional clarification. That communication is not a violation of the open meeting law because there is not a quorum present, and you're not deliberating towards a decision, you're just gathering information.
So what if they're gathering information by reading the Facebook pages or the news on the internet?
Or standing in a crowded room at the same time and listening to 10 people speak about something?
If it's a social gathering, that's fine. As long as you don't deliberate toward a decision.
It's not a social gathering. Facebook, a lot of people would say that's a social gathering.
It may or may not be, depending on whether it's a public or private social media page. But
Well, if I go into a room of 100 people, or if I go into a room of 1,000 people, or if I go into a room of one person, I'm not sure that, is it a number? Is there a number out there that makes this determination?
the key is not how many are in the room, The key is how many council members are present.
But should
So that's where
a quorum exists and there's no participation by the council,
it's a matter of presence, not participation. If you're present in a quorum to deliberate toward a decision, and that's where you get it gets in the conundrum. Why are you present? And is it to deliberate toward a decision? Are you gathering facts and information pertinent to a future decision? That becomes the issue. That's why it's dangerous. And I'm going to defer the AG's office for an opinion, but that's what we're trying to say is that there is a potential problem because that's a deliberation outside the public, your constituents. And there are plenty of your constituents that are not on Facebook and not on social media. I, for one, don't care to be on social media at all. So.
can I join you in that?
Yeah. And I think it's a very dangerous territory for public officials to be in social media. Once they get elected, your rules change.
Well, let's say it's not Facebook. Let's say it's a restaurant and there's a quorum, not sitting at the same table, but there's a quorum present within the restaurant. And an individual stands up and says, here's what I think about that. Is that an issue for the council members or for the committee members?
Well, it's, again, a quorum present to deliberate, exchange information toward a decision. So it gets into that nuance. And so what is going to happen if somebody files a complaint, which is usually what will happen, they'll see you there together, or they'll see you there in split like you're talking about. They'll see you there in the same room and they'll assume. And they'll file a complaint. Well, the AG's office's job is to investigate those complaints, talk to the witnesses, and gather information about what actually happened in that environment and whether it qualified for a violation. That's their job. So, again, it's just one of those areas that it's safer to stay away from it than it is to subject yourself to potential investigation, scrutiny, and avoid that inadvertent violation or even the public perception of a violation, because that's going to get the complaints. Not every complaint is upheld, but it does have to be evaluated and investigated in some cases too. And there's a risk, and we'll get to that, and I should probably move to that. Yeah, we talked about that. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. There's a risk of civil fines and criminal penalties. So if it's worth $1,000 to you, I mean, not to me. No. In fact, the founder of Apple, the co-founder of Apple, Wozniak, said everybody should get off Facebook. And I don't know why, but I saw the headline there. I thought, so if you're not on, don't get on it, I guess, would be my suggestion. But again, this is an area that, if the AG hasn't weighed in, that's their job. And if the legislature needs to clarify it further, they'll be happy to do that in another session, and you'll have this same kind of discussion there. Because that's their job too. Now, they aren't subject to the open meeting law, by the way.
I believe the state legislature exempted themselves from
They did. They did. They do try to follow it. It's amazing. In terms of notice and that sort of thing, but yeah, no, there's a lot of, especially in the last 30 days, and even intensifies when they suspend the rules 10 days before they end. So you have no idea who's meeting where. You just got to be in the halls, wandering around, talking to other people. Does anybody do anything on this thing? And the horse trading happens. In fact, a friend of mine was a deputy state risk manager, and he decided for some reason he had a bill that was still pending, and he stayed till sine die, which was midnight on the last day. And about 10 minutes before midnight, a lobbyist showed up with an amendment to a bill that he was watching to see if that bill would go through. An amendment that would have affected us and our members, as well as the state. And when that amendment got pitched, he happened to be there and stood up and said, wait a minute, this has a fiscal impact on us and local government. And that killed the bill. So stuff happens at the end when the rules are suspended. And they make committee meetings on the floor. They just call them. Right now, they do a meeting. I was told to sit in the audience and wait in case this one legislator needed me, because she was going to have a floor committee meeting. So I'm sitting there in the audience, and then she has her floor committee meeting, and she turns to me and she goes, okay, whatever she did, she didn't need me, I guess. But so that kind of stuff happens. Well, they don't allow that to happen in local government. You don't get to suspend the rules. All right, let's go back to public comment. There is a privilege, an immunity for somebody making slanderous comments. They have immunity. But it's interesting is that the legislature, when you're a lobbyist, you read it on the, or testifying, you read on this statement, say it is unlawful to knowingly mislead or lie to, in a sense, a legislative committee. It's unlawful. So it's sitting right there on the table, so you have to tell the truth. You can't. Now, if the truth is, yes, you're an idiot. If that's the truth, then that's a defense you have. And I told the truth, he is an idiot, right? Likewise, you, as a receiver of public comment, if you make a comment, you have some immunity as well, but not if you take administrative action to implement an unconstitutional comment. So I would encourage you not to get in that troublesome fishbowl problem of overreacting to comments made about your character. You can make dumb statements and you'll be immune, but you can't act on them, or you won't be. So it's just wise to public comment civil. And that's why the article I handed you called In Search of Civility was published by the National Association of Counties, and I'd encourage you to read that because it's a problem nationally where the public decorum in council meetings between the public and the council has become really problematic. And so that's the goal of that article. All right, let's talk about minutes. Your job as council members is to read the minutes and to make sure, because the job of the minute taker is to capture the essence of the discussion, but absolutely capture the action. And that's why so moved is banned, in my opinion. And the city clerk should pipe up and say, please clarify the motion so I can get it correct for the minutes. But each council member should hold the others accountable for an accurate motion. Okay? Same for the committees. Hold each other accountable for a clear motion. And the person who seconds the motion should make sure they understand the motion before they second it and ask for clarity first before they second it. And if they still aren't clear after they've seconded, then come back and say, I want to re-clarify. I want to amend. Or I want to withdraw my second so we can amend the motion. You want to do something to make sure the record is clear. But read your minutes and make sure that that is captured. The clerk does not have to do verbatim transcript. It can be done, but the former city of Gab, which is now a town, that clerk, when I said you only have to capture the essence of the discussion and the actual decision, she said it just saved her 2 weeks worth of work of transcribing, literally. but that's what the statute says. Now, your minutes are a public record. They're kept on file at least 5 years, and they have to be archived after that, or they can be in the state library and archives or your own archival resources. But that's your legacy. So if a clerk captures your legacy, make sure you read your legacy before you approve it. Okay? The one thing that they changed is that audio or transcriptions used to be a 1-year preservation period. It's now 3 years for the audio. And sometimes that's helpful on difficult decisions, like zoning variance provisions, stipulations, and things like that, and can be kind of complex. So those recordings are there. But remember, all those recordings and all those minutes become part of your record in case of litigation. So it's not just the ordinance change that you did or the permit that you processed, it's what is the record supporting that. So that's why you have to read them and ask for corrections. And occasionally you'll find a good council member who will read them and find the typos if they're in there. I'm sure you make a typo here and there. No, never? Okay. All right. Attorney General. This is all new. And it gives you some protection. The Attorney General has to notify the public of a complaint more than 14 days after it's filed. Remember, the public, you can go on the website as a member of the public. There's an online form. You can fill out the complaint form. And the public official may never know about it. Now they have to be, the public body has to be notified within 14 days by the AG. And then they shall investigate, so this is mandatory. They shall investigate and prosecute any complaint filed within 120 days violation. There is an exception, and that is it's discretionary if the violation was not discoverable within 120 days, and the complaint is not more than 1 year after the violation. So there's a 1 year look-back period. If it really wasn't discoverable within 120 days or within 1 year of the actual violation, because of for whatever reason, then they have a little bit of exemption. But otherwise, it tightens the time frame, gets the immediate response from the AG, letting you know something's going on, and then they have to investigate and conclude the matter within 120 days most of the time. They're not required if they determine the interests of the person filing the complaint are not significantly affected by the action alleged. And this is to get at the frequent complainers who don't really have a stake in the action, all complaints in order to disrupt business. We had one guy who actually filed an open complaint and demanded that he be given a password and username to have access to the city system so he could find his own records. Needless to say, that was denied. So, yeah. Significantly affected then is defined as standing to file action in court or as a person within the geographic area of the public body or as a non-governmental legal entity whose mission or purpose is to foster and protect democratic principles, promote transparency. So there can be groups that are open government advocacy group type thing, and they would have standing to be significantly affected if there's a violation. But if you're just harassing and would not be significantly offended, like you're from another state filing an open meeting complaint on general principles, there's a bill that was going to pretty much allow litigation against governments on principles for people anywhere in the country, on principles that wouldn't affect them at all. And so that was creating potential additional big problem. That bill got defeated. This is an area where at least the AG is now forced to make a determination within a reasonably short period of time. After there's investigation, then they make a finding of no violation occurred or a violation occurred, and they have to give the findings of fact and the conclusions of law that support that violation. So you know exactly what they found, the fact they applied the law. And then the public body or its attorney, after receipt of the findings of violation, to submit a response. And here's the interesting thing. If you don't respond within 30 days to the AG, it's deemed that you disagree with it. So that's kind of good. So if you're busy, ignore it, and they assume you disagree. But that's not the end of the hunt. It's not over. But I thought that was interesting. A little bit of a protection for you. Didn't mean that you had to agree. So. And this is why you don't want to, well, you do put your money on the line, but again, the action taken in violation of the law is void. That's number one, so it's not going to do you any good to take action in violation because it's not going to work anyway. Somebody can sue to get an injunction to stop you from implementing or to declare it void. But criminal sanctions, each member who attends a meeting where any violation occurs, this is really important new language, has knowledge of a violation and participates in the violation is guilty of a misdemeanor. They're trying to make that very clear, that where any violation occurs, has knowledge of a violation and participates is guilty of a misdemeanor. That's the criminal side. Wrongful exclusion of a person from a meeting is a misdemeanor. And this goes back years ago with the city of Reno, where Mayor Griffin and Sam Dene were constantly battling. Because Sam was a frequent public commenter and he was kind of confrontational, and the mayor and he just didn't like each other. And so whenever Sam would go off the rails in the mayor's opinion, he'd throw him out. And then Sam filed a complaint and it was upheld. So wrongful exclusion is a misdemeanor. You can exclude certain people that are disruptive and dangerous to the meeting, but you got to be careful when you do it. And fines up to $1,000, jail up to 6 months, and removal from office if criminally convicted. So there's some pretty steep penalties for significant violations. But then they changed the administrative fines in addition to criminal. And that's the first offense is still $500. But the second offense is $1,000, and third and subsequent is $2,500. And then here's something your attorney will like. It used to be that if you were given advice by the attorney about an open meeting law issue, that advice had to be consistent with prior opinions, or you could be held responsible for an intentional violation. They changed that to say if you relied on his advice, it's not intentional, even if his advice was wrong or not consistent with prior opinions. So it kind of took a little bit of burden off the city attorney over that issue. But just look at those fines and say, it's worth it to me to pay $500 every time I think that's in violation of meeting law. Because if I do it twice, it's $1,000. I do it. And this, by the way, Washoe County School District a couple of years ago got in real trouble over this one. And there were 6 board members out of the 7 that got fined $500 each for 6 violations. So it can happen. Yes?
So those sanctions and the fines and that, if you happen to be at a meeting, even if you don't partake and you don't vote or whatever, but it's determined that something you know, there was a violation, just because you were there, you will also have to pay those fines and penalties, correct?
Yeah, if you participated when there's a violation, again, we'll follow right there. Each member who attends a meeting where any violation occurs has knowledge of a violation and participates in the violation. So it's not that you participate in the conversation, it's that you participating knowing there's a violation because you have a walking quorum and you stayed in it anyway.
And I assume just the fact that you stayed there and didn't get up and walk away means you're guilty.
That puts you in that jeopardy, yes. Obviously, you don't get convicted on accusation, you get convicted on facts and investigation, but it does run the risk of a civil fine at least.
So this is where, could a member say, I wasn't aware that I was violating? Particularly since after we've had this training.
Yeah. Well, you could say that, and the question is, the investigation will look at it and say, how obvious was it? You knew or should have known. You know, that's the term the attorneys are familiar with, right? You knew or should have known of a violation. So you don't want to get there. So again, it's a people's business. It should be conducted in the open. Madison says it's a farce or tragedy if it's not, and that information is not available to the public. And so if you look at the spirit of it, you want it to be open to the rest of the public. You want them to participate and be aware of what the council's working on. It's their business. That's why you got elected, is to represent them, not yourself, not your interest group, not the people who bend your ear all the time, but all the people that are silent as well as those that oppose you. The community you serve them, it's not the other way around. You serve the community. And so when you start going off into working in sort of cliques, if you will, you run the risk of not serving all the people. And sometimes the loudest voice should be ignored. Other times they should be listened to. So it's your job to get out there and engage with the community to understand the issues that are needed, but then you raise your discussion level to the community as a whole. What's best for this community in the long run? And by all means, if you have adopted an ordinance or there's a state law that governs this stuff, follow the law. Follow your own rules. And as council members, look at those rules and say, is it still applicable? The circumstances require us to have a discussion, debate about changing this policy. Then have that discussion and debate. You may not change it, but have the discussion, do it in public. And I'll just mention this. A school district had passed a policy that said any student caught with alcohol on any school activity would be banned from all extracurricular activities for the rest of the time they're in high school. They were after some football players that created the problem. Fast forward a number of years, different board members, and this time it was a 4-H student, academically talented, not the target the original policy was adapted. He was a freshman. And so the board, the current board, wasn't aware that that was the policy because he hadn't read them. And then they became aware and they thought it was draconian. It was too much. There should be some flexibility. So they had a public hearing. And former principals stood up and former teachers stood up and said, well, we never did it that way. What we did was if that kid would do things to rehabilitate himself, then we allow him back into the extracurricular activity. So the question then becomes, what is the board's policy? And that's why policy making is so difficult. What is the board's policy? Well, we learned this in litigation starting in law enforcement side, the official policy is not the written document. It's the policy as practiced. That's the official policy. So you can write a great policy that says there shall be no discrimination on the basis of X, Y, and Z. But if in practice you allow it to persist and you don't train people on the policy, then it's what they do that is the policy. And the courts will hold you accountable for the policy as practiced, especially at the federal level. So that's why it's important for council members to read the policies. So as new council members, get the city ordinances and read them. Try to understand them, spend some time. And I would suggest that at least every meeting, start looking at the section of the policies. Pick one policy and just have a meeting in which that's a discussion topic, whether it needs changing or not. That creates awareness. And then when there needs changing, you might need more than one meeting because you have to go through and iterate and redraft whatever those changes need to be, but take it policy by policy. I'd start with the top 10 most critical policies. Put one a month on your agenda. That gets you through the critical ones. Then spread the others over, say, 3-year period. So at least during your term, you will have looked at the top 10 every year and the rest of them within your term. That keeps you fresh and current and allows you to take action to modify those policies when it's necessary. But if you're not aware of them, then it's a shock when the policy doesn't work. Now you're in trouble because you got to follow the policy, but it doesn't work. So you got to amend it on the hurry. So that's a primary job of the council. Yes, you get to do awards and recognition and all that approval of projects and all that neat stuff. But policy making is where the hard thinking comes in. All right. So it's when you're in doubt, be open. So if you're in doubt at all about this social media stuff or other things, go for transparency. Follow Madison's guidance and stay away from those hidden discussions. All right, other questions? If you think this was difficult, where do we get to ethics?
If you're on a committee and you and another committee meet, you've been at the meeting and you're walking out and there were people there at the hearing and whatever, and you get stopped in the hall by a couple of people and one of the other committee members is with you. So there's actually like 4 or 5 people there. 2 are committee members and 3 are just general public, I guess for lack of a better explanation. And they start asking questions or something, or there's a discussion. There's no violation with that, is there? Because there are only 2 of you there and it's just general.
It's less than a quorum. You can have that discussion.
Okay.
But again, you got to be careful that your fellow member doesn't walk up and engage, because that's a common human tendency.
Yeah.
So to continue on that, after the meeting's over and action's already been taken, somebody approaches and wants to talk about that, the action that's already occurred. Any potential for violations occurring if there's a quorum on an action that's already occurred?
Yeah, because you're deliberating on something different, right, potentially. Even after the action, that could be deliberation toward a different action. So again, it's present it's the purpose of the presence, it's deliberation toward an action. So, and I'll just bring this up at this point too. If you're in the minority on a vote, is it your decision?
Yes.
Absolutely yes. It's the decision of the council because the council only has power when together in a quorum at a properly noticed meeting. Individual council members have no power. Let me repeat. Individual council members have no power. It's the collective council taking action at a properly noticed meeting that has the power over the city and its operations and functions in the context of the laws and ordinances and policies of the city. So I don't want new council members going out there and saying to an employee, you can't do this. They're not your employee individually to manage. That's his job. Your job is to report and let him take the appropriate action.
So, just let me clarify for here in Boulder City specifically, in the charter, the council actually has more than one employee. The council has 4 employees.
Okay.
They report directly to the council. The city manager, who's responsible for the day-to-day operations of the city. The city attorney, who provides the legal advice to the council and represents the council, but also provides legal advice to the city staff as well. Probably 98% of his work by the staff. The third one is the city clerk, who reports directly to the council. And the fourth one that people kind of know, well, that is the municipal judge, who is appointed by the council. He's elected as the justice of the peace, but he's actually appointed as the municipal court judge, and reports to the council under that.
Okay. Good clarification. Yes?
You're a member of a committee that's an advisory committee and has no ability to set policy. I don't see why you fall under the same requirements for open meeting laws, because you can't set a policy. So whatever you deliberate is an advisory decision that goes to the council, and the council can decide. So
Okay, what?
I talk to other people about what we're deliberating, other members of the committee. We aren't making any decisions that are binding on it.
You are subject to the open meeting law, however, because if the council created the committee, you are an arm of the council, you're advising the council. So all the council has done is delegated a portion of their debate and deliberation themselves to a committee. And so because you're advising the council, you're subject to the open meeting law. That's how committees get brought into the loop.
And as he explained earlier, there are situation exemptions for certain committees that do not fall under the open meeting law. And that was a court case that actually came out of the city of Las Vegas, where if a committee is formed under the authority of the city manager, those committees do not fall under the open meeting law requirement, because they are not the policy-making arm or the council. They are advising the city manager on operational policies, administrative rules, those kinds of things. And in this city, we do now have a committee. It's the Boulder City Hall, advises the city manager on potential issues dealing with economic development, policies, procedures, administrative actions, and whatnot. That then I would take that information and provide recommendations to the body as the city manager going forward on those particular points.
Yeah, the exception being if the manager allows his committee to take a vote. If he allows voting, then that he's created an open meeting law committee. All right. All right, well, let's take a break. Let's make it 5. Quick break. Then we'll go into the ethics law.